This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitzahone, and it is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. The full set list for Theros Beyond Death is just around the corner, and I thought that meant it was a good time to take a look at the very first time we visited this plane in the set simply called Theros, which released in 2013. To be eligible for this list, a card had to receive its very first printing in Theros. This means that reprints like Magma Jet and Thoughtseize were not considered for this list. In total, Theros had 249 cards, and in this video we're going to talk about the 10 that have made the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's look at number 10. At number 10, I have Stormbreath Dragon. Many sets receive a super pushed Mythic Rare Dragon, and this is what we got for our trip to Theros. A 5-mana 4/4 with Flying, Haste, and Protection from white would probably be enough to see play, at least in Standard. This is because it puts the opponent under tremendous pressure, since you can kill them in just a few turns without any help from any other cards. The protection really matters too, because there were plenty of white flyers around and white removal spells that the dragon just didn't care about. But if the game gets late enough and you have 7 mana lying around, Stormbreath Dragon can also become monstrous. Monstrous was one of the new mechanics in Theros, and it basically just lets you pay a cost to add +1/+1 counters to your creature, and it is something you can only do once. It's very similar to the Simic mechanic Adapt. In the case of the dragon, it becomes a 7/7, and also punishes opponents for holding onto a bunch of cards. Stormbreath Dragon was played a lot in Standard. Aggro decks like to have him for the top of the curve, and control decks like to play him as a win condition, so he was really played in most red decks. Near the end of his time in Standard, Stormbreath Dragon got an extra boost from the fact that Tarkir block had a dragon theme, and there were a bunch of payoffs in the set for having dragons, so much so that an entire control deck subtype existed. These decks ran dragons as win conditions, and they also ran things like Draconic Roar, which they easily got extra value out of. Stormbreath Dragon has a single point in Modern, which it gained back in 2016 in a Scred Red deck. It also has 2 points in Vintage, appearing as a sideboard card in an Oath of Druids deck. It doesn't have points anywhere since 2017, and it will probably never be a staple in formats like Modern or Vintage, but the fact that it has a few points in those formats probably also means we shouldn't assume it is never going to gain any more points in them. And with the creation of the Pioneer format, the Stormbreath Dragon may find new life. At number 9, it's Read the Bones. This is a nice card draw spell for black. For 3 mana, you potentially get to see 4 cards, thanks to Scry, and even if you don't see a full 4, you get to improve the quality of the draws you're going to have as much as you possibly can before you draw the cards. That's pretty good for 3 mana. And sure, like most black card draw spells, you have to pay some life, but this is powerful enough that it's worth it. Read the Bones also gets an extra boost because it was also reprinted in Magic Origins, which made it legal in Standard between 2013 and 2016, and while it was played in a bunch of different control decks that featured black as one of their colors. At number 8, it is Nickdose, Shrine to Nyx. Devotion was one of the format-defining mechanics for Theros Standard, with many Devotion decks achieving Tier 1 status, and Nickdose played a large role in that. This legendary land gave you a great payoff for playing lots of permanents with the same colored mana symbols on them, because it could help you produce absolutely absurd amounts of mana, even in the early going. In Devotion to Blue, it could help you easily cast Cyclonic Rift with Overload, and in Devotion to Green, it could help you cast a huge Genesis Hydra. Nickdose also has a few points in Modern, where it has appeared in a few elf decks, who generally plan on using Nickdose to pump huge amounts of mana into Izuri, Renegade Leader, and win the game on the spot. It has no points since 2015, but I think it is safe to say that is going to change, since Devotion decks are doing great in Pioneer right now, and we have Premier events for the format coming in 2020. There are a lot of cards on this list that could benefit from Pioneer being created, but Nickdose is probably the one that I am the most certain will see a lot of play in the new format. At number 7, it is Fleecemain Lion. 2 mana 3/3s that cost a green and a white have come a long way since Watchwolf. Fleecemain Lion gives you great stats for a 2 mana creature, and then comes with a pretty great box of text. It comes with that monstrosity mechanic, and sure, getting 1+1/+1 counter for 5 isn't exactly something to be excited about, but the 2 keywords Fleecemain Lion gets are pretty incredible, and are certainly 2 of the most powerful ones around: Hexproof and Indestructible. This means you can't use most removal spells on the Lion. It also means that it can attack and block without being concerned about ever dying. The particularly nasty thing to do with the Lion is just to leave up mana for the monstrosity, since if your opponent decides they're going to try to kill it, you can just use it in response and fizzle their removal spell. The Lion was a key part of mini decks during its time in Block and Standard because it is difficult to beat this kind of efficiency. Early in his time in Standard, he was featured in decks like Naya and Selesnya Aggro. However, the Lion put up the bulk of its points in a deck that dominated Standard starting in 2014, Abzan. Abzan was just a deck loaded up with hyper-efficient creatures all along the curve, and the Lion was the ideal 2-drop for the deck. The Lion has never managed any points in non-rotating formats, and it doesn't look like it is having a big impact on Pioneer right now either, so it may not manage any points going forward. At number 6, it's Dissolve. This is probably the least impressive card on this list from a power level standpoint. It's basically just cancel with Scry 1 attached. That really isn't anything special, and I'm not entirely convinced that it is a card that would see play in every Standard format like a lot of the cards on this list. Scry is great and all, but you're still looking at a 3-mana counterspell with only a tiny bit of upside. However, it benefited from the fact that the Standard it was part of had a huge shortage of good counterspells. As a result, if you were a control deck and you wanted to play a counterspell, this was kind of a necessary evil. It isn't a very exciting story, but that's really how Dissolve managed to put up 77 points while it was in Standard and Block. At number 5, it's Lightning Strike. It might be Lightning Bolt for twice the mana, but as has been the case for a long time now, a 2-mana Lightning Bolt is usually a pretty great card for Standard. This has been proven recently, as it received reprints in both Ixalan and Core Set 2019, and it saw play in those Standard formats too. This also means that, like Read the Bones, Lightning Strike has received an extra boost thanks to having a pretty long time in Standard, but I think the fact that it continues to be a relevant card regardless of what Standard it is certainly important. 2 mana to do 3 to anything at instant speed is sort of the new gold standard for burn spells, at least in Standard. Like most really efficient burn spells, Lightning Strike also benefits from the fact that control decks like to play them, as do aggro decks, who can use them to efficiently burn blockers out of the way or to help them do lethal. This inclusion in multiple types of red decks has really allowed Lightning Strike to amass a pretty high score, and I think it's likely we see the score continue to go up because red deck wins is a thing in Pioneer. At number 4, it is Sylvan Caryatta. Creatures who can help you both ramp and fix your mana tend to be pretty highly valued in Standard formats, and that's what the Caryatta does. One of the most annoying things about playing mana creatures sometimes is you play it, and you start thinking about what you'll be able to do with that extra mana on your next turn, only to have your mana creature eat a Lightning Strike to the face. This is always very deflating, but you don't have to worry about that here, at least most of the time, and that's because the Caryatta has hexproof. This means it is going to be providing you mana for a long time, not just for a turn or two. It was played in just about every green deck there was in both Block and Standard. Probably the nastiest thing it could do came in Abzan decks, where it could allow you to play a turn 3 Siege Rhino. That's not a whole lot of fun for your opponent. It also has a single point in Modern, coming in a Jeskai Ascendancy combo deck. A deck that loaded up with spells and mana creatures with the intention of comboing off and making your board huge and producing a bunch of mana, and the Caryatta helped achieve that. It doesn't have any points since 2016, but it is another card that could benefit from the creation of the Pioneer format. At number 3, it's Elspeth, Sun's Champion, a super powerful planeswalker. Sure, she costs 6 mana, but she has some very powerful abilities. She has a +1 that gives you 3 creature tokens, meaning she can come down and do a good job of protecting herself right away, while also adding to her loyalty. She has a -3 that kills all the big creatures, which will leave her token friends behind, and she has an ultimate that turns all your creatures into huge flyers. It is just very hard to deal with Elspeth if she resolves, particularly because of the army of tokens she quickly builds to hide behind. Because of her high mana cost, Elspeth has largely been featured in mid-range and control decks in all 3 formats she has points in, Block, Standard, and Modern. She's a great win condition in those decks because she can single-handedly help you stabilize, even if you are pretty far behind on the board. While she isn't exactly heavily played in Modern, she only has 10 points since being printed back in 2013, she does see pretty consistent play there, putting up a few points every year, usually in Jeskai or blue-white control decks. This means that she's going to continue to add to her score, although I don't imagine she'll be gaining a ton of points or anything like that. And number 2, it's Anger of the Gods. This is a powerful board sweeper. 3 mana to do 3 to everything has always been a nice deal, and that extra clause that exiles creatures is also very relevant in a world with lots of graveyard decks. Obviously enough, you don't really want to be playing this in a deck that has lots of small creatures, because it will absolutely devastate your own board. This is more of a card for control decks. That's where it was prominently featured in Standard. This is the kind of card that can just completely hamstring an aggro deck, leaving them unable to ever do enough damage to kill you before you manage to stabilize the game. Modern has been where it has been played the most, and while it is featured in control decks there, it also sees play in a lot of combo decks, like Scapeshift, Reanimator, and formerly Splinter Twin. These are decks that need every turn they can possibly get in order to combo off and quickly win the game, and Anger of the Gods is usually going to give them more time, and thus a greater chance of finding a way to combo off. Anger of the Gods is a key card in Modern, and it is going to continue putting up lots of points there in the coming years. Most likely, it will pass the number 1 card on this list in a year or two. But for now, the number 1 card from Theros is Hero's Downfall. 3 mana to kill any creature or planeswalker at instant speed is the kind of card that would be heavily played in any standard format. Killing creatures is great, but having a card in your deck that can just instantly kill powerful planeswalkers is also a huge bonus, as just about every standard has a few of those, like Elspeth, Sun's Champion. It was a staple in black standard decks the entire time it was there, and that's what allowed it to get a massive 163 points. However, while Hero's Downfall is the kind of card that will always be good and played a ton in standard, it also is the kind of card that will never see play in non-rotating formats because there are far more efficient ways to deal with both creatures and planeswalkers. Downfall doesn't have any points since rotating out of standard, and it doesn't even seem to be doing a whole lot in Pioneer. It seems very possible that Downfall is done gaining points. That's why I think Anger of the Gods has a great chance to pass it in the near future. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. In the comments, tell me the card from Theros Beyond Death that you think is most likely to come out on top when I do a top 10 on that set in a few years. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to make sure you are up to date on my other top 10s, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.